The first time Elias Verne saw the symbols, he laughed. Not because they were funny, but because everyone else had already decided they were meaningless. The chamber aboard the deep space research vessel Astrius was filled with the quiet arrogance of advanced civilizations. Representatives from 12 species stood, or hovered, or flickered, in a circular formation around the artifact. The walls hummed faintly with translation fields and atmospheric stabilizers, allowing beings from worlds with methane skies and crystalline bodies to share the same space. At the center, suspended in a field of pale blue light, was the object. A sphere. Not large, no bigger than a human skull. Its surface shimmered like liquid metal, yet it remained perfectly still. Across it, etched in faint glowing lines, were the symbols. They twisted and curved, looping into one another in ways that seemed almost deliberate, but also impossibly chaotic. Primitive markings, said Cothrix, a tall, multi-limbed scholar from the Tellien Concord. His voice clicked and whirred through the translator. Likely ceremonial. Perhaps an early attempt at written language. Or art, added another. Crude art. A ripple of agreement passed through the assembly. Elias leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching them dismiss it. He wasn't supposed to be here. Humans, after all, were still considered new. Their inclusion in the Interstellar Academic Coalition had been a courtesy, an acknowledgement of potential rather than achievement. Most species had been traveling the stars for millennia. Humans had barely managed a few decades beyond their solar system. But Elias had been invited personally, not because he was important, because no one else wanted the job. Let the human take a look, someone had said earlier. If nothing else, it will keep him occupied. So here he was. Elias pushed himself off the wall and stepped forward. Mind if I try? He asked. A few of the delegates turned toward him, some with curiosity, others with mild annoyance. Cothrix made a dismissive gesture. By all means, perhaps your species will find meaning in nonsense. Elias smiled faintly. Maybe, he said. Or maybe we just see nonsense differently. He approached the sphere. Up close, the symbols were even stranger. They weren't just etched into the surface. They seemed to shift slightly, like they were alive. Not physically moving, but rearranging in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. Elias frowned. That's new, he muttered. What is? Asked one of the observers. They're not static, Elias said. Look closely. A few leaned in. The symbols were indeed shifting, but so slowly that it was almost impossible to notice unless you were staring directly at a single point. Reactive material, someone suggested. Still meaningless. Elias didn't respond. Instead, he pulled out his tablet. Can I get a projection feed? He asked. A moment later, a holographic display flickered into existence above the sphere, mirroring its surface in high resolution. Elias began tracing patterns with his finger. At first, it looked random. Curves intersecting at odd angles. Lines looping back into themselves. No clear repetition. No obvious structure. But Elias wasn't looking for language. He was looking for math. Rotate the sphere, he said. The containment field responded, slowly turning the artifact. Elias watched. Faster. The rotation increased. Now the symbols blurred slightly, creating overlapping patterns. Elias's eyes widened. Stop. The sphere halted. Elias stared at the projection, then began tapping rapidly on his tablet. What are you doing? Cothrix asked, irritation creeping into his tone. Sure, Elias said absent-mindedly. He zoomed in on a section of the symbols. Then another. Then another. He overlaid them, aligned them, adjusted for curvature. His breathing slowed. Okay, he whispered. Okay, that's not random. What isn't? Someone demanded. Elias turned the projection outward so everyone could see. These, he said, highlighting several curved segments. They repeat, but not in a linear way. They repeat in rotational symmetry. Silence. That proves nothing, Kothrick said. Symmetry is common in decorative structures. Not like this, Elias replied. He tapped again. The projection shifted, isolating a specific cluster of symbols. Look here, he said. This pattern appears 12 times across the surface, but each time it's rotated by a precise angle. He paused. An angle that corresponds to 30 degrees. Coincidence, someone said. Elias shook his head. No. Because when you map all the rotations together, he executed another command. The hologram reconfigured, flattening the sphere surface into a two-dimensional projection. Gasps rippled through the room. The chaos resolved. The symbols aligned into a grid. Not perfect, but intentional. Now that, Elias said quietly, is not art. Kothrick stepped closer, his many eyes narrowing. Explain. Elias swallowed. He wasn't entirely sure himself, but he had a feeling. These aren't symbols, he said. Not in the way you think. Then what are they? Elias hesitated. Then he said it. They're equations. The room fell silent. That is absurd, Kothrick snapped. Equations require structure. Syntax. These markings have both, Elias interrupted. He zoomed in again. See these repeating curves? They're not letters. They're variables. And these intersections, these aren't decorative. They're operations. He looked around the room. You've been trying to read it like a language. He tapped the projection. But it's not a language. It's math. They didn't believe him. Not at first. For the next 6 hours, Elias worked under the watchful, skeptical gaze of the galaxy's finest minds. He mapped patterns, tracked repetitions, measured angles. He began assigning values, not arbitrary ones, but based on ratios, frequencies, and spatial relationships. Slowly, painstakingly, the chaos began to resolve into something coherent. A system, not like any known mathematics, but still math. By the 10th hour, even Kothrix had stopped arguing. By the 12th, the room had emptied of all but the most dedicated observers. And by the 15th, Elias found it. He froze. His hands hovered above the tablet. No way, he whispered. What? Kothrix demanded, now unable to hide his interest. Elias looked up. I think it's a model. A model of what? Elias turned the projection outward again. He tapped a sequence. The symbols shifted, rearranging into a three-dimensional structure. A lattice. Complex. Elegant. Impossible. What is that? Someone asked. Elias's voice was barely audible. Space-time. Silence. You're suggesting, Kothrix said slowly, that this artifact contains a representation of the fundamental structure of the universe? Elias nodded. Not just a representation, he said. A map. The implications were staggering. If Elias was right, the sphere wasn't just an artifact. It was a key. A blueprint of reality itself. The coalition mobilized immediately. Teams were signed. Resources allocated. Entire departments redirected to assist Elias in decoding the sphere. And at the center of it all was the human they had dismissed. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into months. Elias barely slept. He lived in the chamber now, surrounded by projections, equations, and half-eaten meals. The symbols revealed more with each layer of understanding. They described dimensions beyond the familiar three. Forces that no species had yet harnessed. Pathways, routes through space that bent the rules of physics. Faster than light travel, Elias said one night, his voice hoarse. Not by propulsion, but by geometry. Cawthrick stared at the projection. You're certain? Elias nodded. It's all here. We've been trying to brute force our way through space. This shows how to fold it. The room buzzed with excitement and fear. Because if this was true, then whoever created the sphere had understood the universe at a level far beyond any known civilization. Who made this? Someone asked. Elias didn't answer, because he was already asking himself a more troubling question.
Why?
The answer came unexpectedly. It was the 103rd day of analysis. Elias was alone in the chamber, staring at a section of the symbols he hadn't been able to decode. They were different, more intricate, almost recursive. He leaned closer. Come on, he muttered. What are you hiding? He adjusted the projection, rotated it, overlaid multiple layers. Nothing. Frustrated, he leaned back and accidentally knocked his tablet. It slipped,
Fell.
hit the floor with a sharp crack. Damn it. He bent down to pick it up. And as he did, his perspective shifted. Just slightly. Just enough. The projection, seen from a new angle, changed. Elias froze. Slowly, he straightened. He moved to the side. The symbols aligned. Not in 2 dimensions. Not even in 3. But in 4. Elias's breath caught. Oh, he reached out, adjusting the projection. Layer by layer, he reconstructed the pattern. And then it clicked. The symbols weren't just equations. They were instructions. A sequence.
A key.
Elias stumbled back. No, he whispered. No, no, no. The chamber lights flickered. The sphere pulsed. For the first time since its discovery, it reacted. Elias stared at it, heart pounding. What did you just do? He breathed. The symbols began to glow brighter.
Faster.
Rearranging, not slowly now, but rapidly. Deliberately. Elias's tablet lit up with warnings. Energy readings spiked. The containment field strained. Stop. Elias shouted, though he didn't know who or what he was speaking to. The sphere ignored him. The symbols locked into a new configuration. And then the room went silent. Completely silent. No hum of machinery. No background noise. Just nothing. Elias looked around. The chamber was still there. But something was wrong. The air felt heavier. The light dimmer. Hello, he called. No response. He turned back to the sphere. It was no longer glowing. It was open. Not physically, but conceptually. Like a door had been unlocked. And something had stepped through. Elias felt it before he saw it. A presence.
Vast.
Ancient. Watching. You solved it. The voice wasn't sound. It was thought. Elias staggered. Who? What are you? I am what remains. The space in front of him shimmered. A form began to coalesce. Not solid. Not entirely visible. A suggestion of shape. Of intelligence. We built the lattice, the presence said. We wrote the equations. We encoded the truth. Elias swallowed hard. Why? A pause. Then, to be found. The entity, if it could be called that, explained. Long before any current civilization had risen, there had been another. One that had mastered the fundamental structure of reality. They had mapped the universe, understood it, and ultimately, outgrown it. We reached the boundary, the presence said. The edge of what could be known within this framework. And then, Elias asked, we left. Elias frowned. Left where? The presence didn't answer directly. Beyond, it said simply. And the sphere? Elias asked. Why leave it behind? Because not all of us chose to go. Elias felt a chill. We remained, The presence continued. Fragments. Echoes. Guardians of the threshold. Threshold. The point at which a species becomes more. Elias's mind raced. You're saying this is a test? Yes. And I passed. A pause. You saw the math. Elias let out a shaky breath. What happens now? The presence shifted. The symbols on the sphere began to glow again, softly this time. Now, it said, you choose. Choose what? The chamber around them seemed to stretch, reality itself bending at the edges. Your species stands at the edge of understanding, the presence said. You can continue as you are, exploring, expanding, discovering slowly. Images flickered in Elias's mind. Human ships, distant colonies, centuries of gradual progress. Or, the presence continued, you can take the next step. The symbols rearranged into a new pattern. A final equation. Transcend. Elias stared at it. His heart pounded. And if we do, you will become as we were. And if we don't, then you will remain as you are. Elias was silent for a long time. Then he asked the question that mattered most. What's the cost? The presence didn't hesitate. Everything. When the others returned, they found Elias sitting alone in the chamber. The sphere was dormant again.
Silent.
Unchanged. What happened? Cothrix demanded. Elias looked up. His eyes were different. Not frightened. Not overwhelmed. Just certain. It's a map, he said. We know that. Cothrix snapped. But the energy surge. I finished it, Elias said. The room went still. And, someone whispered. Elias stood. He looked at the sphere, then at the gathered scientists, at the future of countless civilizations. It's a choice, he said. Cothrix stepped forward. What kind of choice? Elias hesitated. Just for a moment. Then he smiled. The kind we're not ready to make. He turned away from the sphere. Not yet. Years later, the artifact would still sit in its chamber.
Studied.
Debated. Argued over. Some believed Elias had hidden the truth. Others believed he had saved them. But Elias never spoke of what he had seen. Not in detail. Not completely. Because he understood something the others didn't. Elias Verne did not sleep that night. Or the next. Or the one after. The chamber remained sealed under coalition authority, but now it was different. Not just a research site, but a place of quiet tension. Armed observers rotated shifts. Data streams were monitored, restricted, classified. The sphere sat in its field again, silent, as if nothing had ever happened. But Elias knew better. He had felt it. And worse, he understood it. The weight of the choice. Cothrix found him on the fourth day. You are avoiding us, the Tellian scholar said, his voice sharper than usual. Elias didn't look up from his tablet. I'm thinking. That is precisely the problem, Cothrix replied. You are the only one thinking with missing information. Elias finally glanced up. You really want to know? Yes. Elias held his gaze for a long moment. Then he exhaled. It wasn't just a map, he said. It's a transition system. Cothrix stilled. Explain. Elias stood and activated a projection. The familiar lattice appeared, but now, additional layers flickered into existence. Pathways.
Nodes.
Convergences. This, Elias said, is how you move through space instantly. Not by traveling, but by rewriting your position in the structure of space-time. Cothrix leaned closer. Impossible. No, Elias said quietly. Just dangerous. Dangerous how? Elias hesitated, because here it was. The truth he had been holding back. It doesn't just move ships, he said. It changes the observer. Cothrix's limbs stiffened. Meaning? Elias swallowed. To use it fully, you don't stay the same. Silence filled the chamber. You mean biological alteration? Cothrix asked. Elias shook his head.
No.
Something deeper. He tapped the projection. The system assumes the user can perceive higher dimensional structures directly, not mathematically, instinctively. Cothrix processed that. Slowly. And we cannot. No, Elias said. We simulate it, approximate it, but to truly use this, he looked up. You have to become something else. The truth Elias hid. The coalition demanded answers. Meetings were called. Debates erupted across species lines. Some wanted immediate implementation. Others demanded destruction of the artifact. A few, very few, suggested waiting. Elias said almost nothing. But inside, the truth burned, because the entity had shown him more than just the choice. It had shown him the outcome, not in words, in experience. What transcendence really meant. It had not been evolution, not in any human sense. It was conversion, consciousness untethered from biology. Perception stretched across dimensions that made individuality feel small. Time no longer linear. Identity no longer singular. A being that was not a person but a pattern. Beautiful. Terrifying. Irreversible. The vision. Elias had seen humanity take the step. He had seen Earth empty, not destroyed, but abandoned. Cities frozen in time. No war. No collapse, just departure. Because once you became that, you didn't need planets, or bodies, or even language. And worst of all, you didn't come back. The final meeting. It came to a head on the 140th day. Representatives from every major civilization gathered. Elias stood at the center. For the first time since the discovery, he was asked directly, should we activate the system? Cothrix asked. The chamber was silent. Every eye, organic, synthetic, and otherwise, fixed on him. Elias took a breath. This was it. The moment that would decide everything. Elias speaks. It works, he said. A ripple moved through the room. There's no doubt. The equations are complete. The pathways are real. We can use this. Hope surged. Excitement. Ambition. Then Elias raised his hand. But you don't understand what it is. The room quieted again. It's not technology, he said. It's not a tool. It's a threshold. He turned, gesturing to the sphere. You don't use it. His voice dropped. You become it. Silence. The division. Arguments exploded. We have always evolved. This is the next step. We cannot abandon what we are. What we are is limited. Civilizations split along philosophical lines. Progress versus preservation. Ascension versus identity. Elias watched it unfold and said nothing more because he had already made his choice. The quiet decision. That night, Elias returned to the chamber alone. No guard stopped him. No alarm sounded. It was as if the system itself allowed him in. The sphere hovered in silence, waiting. Elias stepped forward. I know you're still there, he said softly. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the symbols flickered. You have decided. Elias nodded. Yes. Will you guide your species forward? Elias closed his eyes. He saw it again. The empty earth. The silent stars. The loss hidden inside transcendence. Then he opened his eyes. No. The sphere dimmed slightly. You choose limitation. Elias shook his head. I choose time. Elias's final act. He stepped closer. Hide it, he said. The presence stirred. Clarify. Elias pointed at the sphere. The full sequence. The final equation. Lock it behind something they can't solve yet. Why? Because we're not ready, Elias said. Not as a species. Not as people. A pause. Then, you would deny them ascension. Elias smiled faintly. No, he said. I'd delay it. The lock. The symbols began to move, rewriting themselves, not removing the truth, but scattering it, fragmenting the final step across layers of complexity no current mind could fully resolve. A safeguard, not permanent, but enough. For how long? The presence asked. Elias looked at the sphere. Until someone else sees what I saw. He hesitated, and still chooses it. The aftermath. Officially, the artifact remained unsolved, partially decoded, inconclusive. Elias returned to Earth. He declined promotions, refused interviews, vanished from public life. Some called him a coward. Others called him a guardian. He never corrected either. Years later, a young researcher stood before the sphere.
Human. Brilliant.
Curious. She tilted her head, studying the symbols. These aren't random, she murmured. Behind her, others laughed softly. Primitive markings. Decorative. She didn't listen. Instead, she whispered, No, this is math. Far away, on a quiet world under a familiar sky, Elias Verne looked up at the stars. And for the first time in years, he smiled.